Well, hello everybody on yet another day with fog around the area. We're just kind of stuck in that pattern as we warned you about early in the week with melting snow, even a little bit this time of year adds that moisture to the atmosphere. A lot of low clouds actually coming in from the southeast. There are some breaks off to the west, but expect pretty gray skies today, and the fog will kind of linger today as well with that haze and more fog tomorrow morning, and don't expect to see much sun until maybe early next week. So in dark blue is the fog, and it kind of just envelopes much of the state. And then here's early tomorrow, widespread fog in varying degrees, some places denser than others, and a pretty quiet, dull pattern too here. Storms staying well to our south, and also any active weather of any kind, and not much of a change in temperatures. So big storm to our south here early in the week, and then maybe late next week, we could see some moisture start to work its way towards us, a Pacific system or a clipper, probably not a lot, but that'll be out ahead of potentially some cold air. So there are some changes potentially ahead late next week into the final days of January. But the snow belt, basically the storm track over the next several days, yeah, all well to the south. You know, Texas, Oklahoma, places you'd expect to have snow in January instead of Minnesota, right? And then the Northeast. But I know some of you have asked me about the polar vortex, and it's been getting a lot of news that it's disturbed or splitting lately. And that's true, and that could change things for us and much of North America, and especially Europe, it looks like. So we do have a split right now. Normally the polar vortex just kind of sits at the North Pole, cold air, and what that is the jet stream moves around that vortex, and it keeps things pretty stable. So what we see in that normal situation, again, this is the North Pole, cold air locked up there. We get occasional cold air, but largely it stays there and the jet stream rotates around it. But what happens when it gets disturbed, what's been happening here over the last several days, is it splits in two. Warm air surges north, so you get some record temperatures and big differences from normal at the North Pole and parts of the Arctic, and then cold into Siberia, and we're starting to see that shift into Europe. And then if that keeps moving around, that once that cold air splits, it can shift. And there are indications that that cold air might shift towards us. So we could be looking at some pretty chilly temperatures, and then that storm track moves along those chunks of cold air, but it might yield more snow for places like the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. And I'll show you kind of why here. But here's the forecast of that jet stream over the next couple of weeks, and you can kind of see that split. You see sort of two different blobs moving around. So cold over Siberia. I want you to pay attention to that. Europe is cold too, but that cold starts to translate late next week, and especially the week after next, towards us. So we get some chunks of cold by maybe next weekend, but then a bigger blast of cold, and you can see these separate chunks of that Arctic cold kind of moving around North America, Europe, and Siberia. And then along the edges of that cold is where we'll see snowfall or storm tracks, but they kind of move all over the place. Best bet for snow in places like Minnesota is on the leading edge of that Arctic front initially. It's got to be just the right perfect setup, but it looks as though a lot of that snow might be landing on the Northeast. So that's when the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic gets big storms. Meanwhile, still very quiet. We'll see what happens here, but temperatures in the upper 20s today, maybe near 30, but with the clouds and fog, I don't think we see a lot of movement on temperatures. And kind of the same thing the next few days, mid to upper 20s, maybe close to 30. But until we see some sunshine, it won't be warming up a little bit yet. Near 30 though, early next week. So again, no big changes in temperature, above normal generally, but just by 3, 4, 5 degrees. And then potentially we'll be looking at some cold late next week. Again, we'll keep our eye on that, but still a ways off to see what happens with that disturbed polar vortex.